remember, World War One saw America enter the war, but Russia exited the war. Russia leaves the conflict because the Tsar is overthrown, and they set up a provisional government. There was, remember, a lot of inequality in the nation, and ultimately, the Tsar just wasn't getting the job done. The people revolt. They set up that provisional government. But the provisional government struggled to provide what the nation needed and turn the country around. And so a civil war starts to break out between certain groups or factions within Russia. And you get two groups, two armies fighting. You get what's called the Red Army, okay? The Red Army, characterized here by the red star and the sickle and the hammer, and the White Army, okay? And they represent two different groups. The Red Army, they represent the socialists and communists who want to establish a government that controls all forms of production and that will work out or work what they believe is in the best interest of the people. They want to create essentially a workers' paradise. And we'll talk about some of the tenets of socialism and communism in a minute. But specifically, the Red Army is supporting that goal. And there's some people who want to try to move straight to communism. There's some people who want to implement socialism right now in the Red Army. And there are some individuals who want a slow progress, who think that it's better to move things slowly. The White Army is basically comprised of everybody who doesn't want communism. They can't agree on a lot, the political groups who make up the White Army, but they know they don't want communism invading their country. And so you're going to get this civil war between the two sides. Many nations, like the United States, are going to have volunteers come and help fight with the White Army to prevent communism. And we'll talk about why specifically in a minute. Now, the ideas behind socialism and communism are relatively new on the world stage. They come from this man, Karl Marx. Marx was a German philosopher, and the German philosopher Karl Marx comes up with this notion that he says, listen, in a capitalist type system, there's two groups of people that exist. You get the bourgeoisie, yes, that's how you say that word, the bourgeoisie. That's the business owning class, the people who own the farms, who own the factories. They control what we refer to as the means of production. So they're in charge of the business. You also get what are called the proletariat, the working class people, the people who work on the farms, the people who work in the factories. The bourgeoisie are making all the money, and the proletariat are working ridiculous hours for very low wages. And Karl Marx said, listen, these two groups of people, what's going to happen is there's going to be resentment that builds up between the two because the proletariat will realize at some point we're doing all the hard work so that the bourgeoisie can get really rich. And Karl Marx said what's going to happen is that in some country in the world, there will be class warfare. Eventually, the proletariat will rise up and they will overthrow the bourgeoisie. They will simply revolt. They will take possession of the business, the means of production, the businesses, the farms, the factories, and they will put it in the hands of the government. And the government will do right by the people. That's the concept in play here. And the people in the Red Army, the people who are the individuals who want to implement socialism into Russia, they called themselves the Bolsheviks. Those are the group, or that is the group of people who are responsible for that. And Marx said, listen, there's way more of the proletariat than there are the bourgeoisie, so when class warfare breaks out, you know who's going to be on the right side, all right? And when class warfare breaks out in Russia, they're going to reorganize. They're going to become something different, what they call the Soviet Union, okay? And Russia, the old Russian flag that you see here, Imperial Russia, their flag is replaced right here with the red flag with the sickle and the hammer and the star. The sickle and the hammer are typically the tools of a working man. Hammers used in factories, sickles used on farms. And so the Soviet Union says, we're going to incorporate all different types of workers together, and we'll create a workers' paradise where people go and they work and they're happy. And the idea was to create a social class that would encompass everyone. There's basically one class of people, that's it, and that everyone would be treated equally. Moreover, in the Soviet Union, the idea was also that this worldwide revolution would eventually spread to other nations. Once it happens somewhere, say in Russia, it will spread to other places, and other workers in the world will be so encouraged that they will rise up against the bourgeoisie in their home country. So let's see what happens here. You see, there's another close up of the sickle and the hammer. Vladimir Lenin, remember, he's one of the key revolutionaries that ousts the Tsar. Lenin's going to implement a new government system here. Now, what you see is the nation that we called the Soviet Union. Russia obviously encompasses a big part of that. It's a massive piece of land, but it's not the only land. Every single one of these nations that you see listed here are nations that are independent nations today. So, for example, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all independent nations. You see, number 6, Ukraine, is an area that's been a hotspot for the last year and a half. And there are plenty of reasons why. So, you ultimately get all these nations would comprise the Soviet Union. They're like all these little states in a country. The same way that the United States has 50 states, the Soviet Union would have 16 member states, or excuse me, 15 member states. And the idea was that each one is its own entity and would be treated with respect despite its physical size. But that was never going to be true. Russia was always the most important, and they were dictating what happened. But all these nations together are going to make up what we call the Soviet Union, with Vladimir Lenin at the head of it. And you see what you see here is Vladimir Lenin in particular. This is an ad that you don't need to know Russian to understand it. You see him sweeping out the old order of things. You see he's sweeping away monarchs because he says monarchs are just going to capitalize on you. What gives them the right to be above everybody else? You also see what looks like a banker down there. He's kind of a portly fellow. Maybe that's a money bag he's got with him, and he's wearing a top hat. And you also see a Russian Orthodox priest. And the communists in particular believed that religion was something that was completely false. And here's why. Lenin and other communists believe, and Karl Marx taught this too, that religion, he called it the opiate of the masses. And they said that religion is just like a drug they give you to put you to sleep. They say, listen, don't be fooled. Christianity is just there to make sure that poor people stay poor and that rich people stay rich. And he pointed out several things within Christianity and other religions that says that just helps keep powerful people in charge. They don't really believe it, and neither should you. And so that's why in the Soviet Union, they would claim there is religious freedom, but the Soviet Union strongly discouraged and put restrictions on religion. Okay, and you see also here Vladimir Lenin too with a broom. That's kind of a common man's working implement, and he's dressed like a commoner as well. You see Lenin right here next to one of his subordinates, Joseph Stalin, that we'll talk about later. And Lenin, he's a guy who promised the Russian people, the Soviet people, 3 things. He said, I'm going to deliver peace, land, and bread. And he's one of the people who encouraged the Russians to get out of World War I, so he's already delivered on the idea of peace. But now he's got to deliver land and bread to the people. And so here's how he's going to do that. He implements something called the New Economic Policy. And what it would do was allow farmers, like he redistributed the land, that peasants would get a small plot of land to work on their own. They took the land from the wealthy bourgeoisie and redistributed it to the masses. So you got peace, now you got land, and he says we got to provide the people with bread. And to do that, this new economic policy, say the example that you see here is somebody grows 10 tons, and the government says we're going to take 50% of your crop. And that seems really high, which it is a lot. But it also said that peasant farmer could sell whatever they wanted, any additional crops, they could sell on the open market. They could sell it to other Russians, to other Soviet nations, or they could sell it in the international market. And so they would be able to profit from that and make money on their own. Now, a lot of people got kind of annoyed with Lenin for this because they're like, that sounds a lot like capitalism. And Lenin said, listen, the journey from capitalism to socialism to communism is not going to happen overnight. And the first thing we want to do is up agricultural production. And to do that, he says, you have to give people a little bit of incentive to do this. And then we'll change things slowly over time. And this system, this new economic policy, benefits these farmers. In fact, there is a certain subset of people who become pretty wealthy farming the land because they innovate and come up with some decent concepts. And they called these wealthier farmers, they referred to them as kulaks. It means something like tight-fisted, which sounds like they're more a little thriftier than anything else. But this new economic policy is going to benefit people, and the crops, the more crops that they grow, the government's 50% obviously is a bigger share. If instead of 10 tons, it's like 20 tons. So that enables the Soviet government for Lenin to be able to feed the people. He's delivered on these three promises of peace, land, and bread. Now, Lenin's not exactly a nice guy, and we'll tell you a little bit more about him later.